Welcome to the Making Schools Work podcast, a podcast for everyone in education. This show is brought to you by the Southern Regional Education Board. At SREB, we believe that every school has the potential to be great. Whatever you do in the school, whatever your job may be, let's talk about things that make schools work.
Erin, what do Oprah Winfrey, Nick Saban, Taylor Swift, and Neil deGrasse Tyson all have in common?
I don't know, Dan. What are you thinking here?
They are exceptional communicators. The ability to connect, clarify, and influence matters whether you're in a school, whether you're on stage, whether you're on the sideline, whether you're on the screen or teaching people science. I'm Dan Rock, a senior instructional coach with Southern Regional Education Board, and I'm joined by Erin Anderson-Williams, a senior leadership coach. You're listening to the Making Schools Work podcast. Erin, good morning.
Good morning, Dan.
We're going to talk today to Thomas Murray about communication in schools, what strong communication looks like, where it breaks down, and why improving it can have a real significant and measurable impact on both culture and learning. This is part of our featured speaker series in which we talk to our featured speakers about their content and about what they're going to present, but also other things that are on their mind and that they are thinking about. Thomas Murray is an educator and author focused on helping schools design learning for students that works for students. He serves as the Director of Innovation for Future Ready Schools. Welcome, Thomas Murray. How are you today?
Awesome. So Dan and Erin, thank you so much for having me. I'm going to be the transparent and say, I don't have this all figured out. I still screw this up from time to time. That's my family. They'll tell you on that, right? I think it's one of the conversations we need to be having with school leadership right now. So thanks for having me. Let me actually start with a story if I could. And it's a story about a time that I really screwed up. This is not Tom coming in saying, here's how I perfected as when I was a school leader. It's about a time that I goofed it up. But we were having this faculty meeting the night before, and we were working through some things. We had to decide some things as a building, and it was a dynamic but challenging conversation, and people put a lot of thought into it. There's some significant disagreement. And it was one of those things we were trying to iron something out as a staff in terms of which direction we were going. I was trying to give people voice and all this stuff. That night, I had one of my teachers reach out. She put a whole lot of thought into this email. Could we do this and this? And here's just a different idea. She probably has at least spent an hour laying out her thoughts and all these ideas. I didn't see it that night. I got up the next day and I had an admin staffing meeting. So I was over with the other administrators in the district, and I'm driving back over around lunchtime. I've got the burger in one hand. I'm at a stoplight. I wasn't driving. I look at my phone. I look at my email. I see it real quick, and I saw where she was coming from, but there was a big flag. Legally, we couldn't do something that she was suggesting. And so in my rush to communicate back to her, I simply said, hey, no, we can't do that. And that's not me. I'm normally I'm an Enneagram 3 with a 2-wing, meaning like I'm that person that's typically saying, hey, first of all, how's your grandma doing? I know she was in the hospital. I hope you're doing well, and all these pieces. But for me, I had 300 emails in my inbox. I'm trying to get back to her. I'm sitting at a stoplight, chewing on my burger, and just wanted to get back to her quickly. I didn't think much of it until the end of the day when she walks in and there's tears in her eyes. And I'm thinking to myself, oh gosh, like what happened? Having no connection to me causing it. And she closed the door and she said, hey, can I talk to you for a sec? And I said, sure, what's going on? And she looked at me and she said, did I upset you? I was like, I have no idea what she's talking about. Literally, I'm looking like, and I looked at her and I said, what do you mean? No, not at all. And she said, well, I put a lot of thought into that email and you gave me a 1-sentence response, and that's just not normally you. And I just want to make sure I didn't upset you, first of all. I have to tell you, I literally almost had tears on the spot. What a humbling moment for me, because in my rush to communicate, in my rush to share out information, I shattered her afternoon. Right. And she probably all afternoon felt sick. It probably threw off her teaching. Here, fortunately, we had a relationship prior that she could come to me and say, hey, that didn't seem right or off. As an administrator, part of my communication, I had to apologize and say, hey, can you take a seat? First of all, you're right. I'm so sorry. I'm sitting at a stoplight responding to you, and you deserved more than that. And I apologize for that. Can I explain really why we can't do it? We talked for 45 minutes, but first and foremost, I had to lead with an apology because I was wrong. my communication in the rush to get back to her ruined her day. I'm glad she had the courage to come to me as a leader, because I wouldn't have thought twice about that. And how many times do people not come to people because it's a boss or a supervisor and they're afraid to say something? And I was very well meaning, trying to get back to the person. I knew in my head why we couldn't do it. But as a teacher, she might not have that understanding. And I'm so glad she did, because if not, I could have shut down voice. I could have shut down her courage. I could have broken trust. And at the end of the day, and what I'm calling the session this summer is great educators are great communicators. I did not model that in that moment. And when I think about the culture side, the relationship side, the trust side, all of those pieces come with communication. And part of the reason I share that story is, number one, I've messed this up countless times. But number two, we've got to be super sensitive, especially as school and district leaders, that our communication is everything. Whether we're communicating with our families, with a student that's in our office, whether we're communicating our staff about a new initiative or supervision, something that has to grow or get better, communication is vital. I think we create so many of our own issues in schools. Let me say it again. I think we create, as leaders, so many of our own issues in our schools. And two, many of them are communication related, right? It's that miscommunication. It was crystal clear in my head why we couldn't, and it wasn't in her head.
Thomas, you're talking about the speed of things, right? You were trying to get that communication and answer back to her quickly. And her email was crafted with time, with thoughtfulness, the night before, pondering some things. And I wonder just how much of crossing of communication happens because of the speed of things. When we're in schools, there are decisions that have to be made quickly. There are things that impact lots of people quickly. I also think, as you were talking, technology, this communication happened across an email, right? Or an email and a text message, but it was the face-to-face 45-minute communication that was able to sort things out and bring what you were thinking and adding to the conversation, what she was feeling, adding to the conversation, resolve. My first impression with that story is just the speed at which we have to communicate today,
Right.
oftentimes just adds just another layer of complexity to effective communication.
I think that's a great point. And I'm thinking about the expectations now of communication. So it used to be, right, in the morning, the principal would pass out a memo into everybody's box, and then the teachers would respond. I don't even know. I started, but there was email, right? But there was a day when there was an email, and there was a far slower cadence of communication back and forth. And it's now, even with text messages, someone will email and then be like, text you, did you get my email? Because you didn't respond. And that non-response to them is communicating something that, like, oh, they're not paying attention to me. So there's like an expectation that people are going to respond quickly. But if you respond quickly, you don't have the time to think and collect. I would imagine, Thomas, that seems to be a factor in some of the current challenges, is the speed that people are trying to work.
Oh, absolutely. And on one hand, we've got more tools than we've ever had. I think, now we think about a snow day, and going back to it, communication used to be, for anybody that's old enough, remembers you got up and you're listening to the radio. And if it's a few letters after your district's name, you're waiting 25 minutes to hear it again. Now it gets sent as an email, as a text message. It's on a website. You get it 10 different ways, right? And so in some ways, communications become more efficient, but the human side of the communication is where it often gets lost. Erin, you were talking about the email example. And I think we've all said over times, like, emails can be misinterpreted, right? Yeah. Like, the one sentence I sent to her was not done in vain. I was not upset, but that's how it was received. And I think the quality of our communication is the way that it's understood. And to me, that's a huge aspect of it. And we can start to dive into, like, why this happens and what we can really be conscious of.
I want to get to that. I want to give another personal problem, because this is really my therapy. I'm a particularly snarky and sarcastic person. It's just the way I was. Erin, no, you?
You can't see my face.
Yes. It was the way I was raised.
My face.
It's my love language, right? It's how I communicate with people I care about. In a classroom, snark and sarcasm are like time bombs, little landmines that will blow up in your face. I also think it's part of what makes me me, right? I've had to learn how to communicate effectively in a way that still is like Daniel, right? But also is not offensive. I don't want to lose, a teacher doesn't want to lose their personality in a classroom. You want to be you. A great teacher is authentic to themselves. So I wouldn't say to myself, don't be sarcastic, but I'd also say you got to be careful. It's not really a question and more of just sort of, I think that's a problem people have is that's who they are. Some people are very concise and don't like to talk. And that can be an issue because they leave out a lot of things, but it's also part of their personality.
Yeah, I think it brings out, Dan, I think you're bringing out two pieces. Number one, it's the know your audience, right? Kind of communication 101 is know your audience. I get to speak all around the country, and some days I'm sitting with all superintendents in a room. A couple of weeks ago, I had a full room of food service workers, and I've done those that aren't even in education, might be in the business world, that kind of thing. 3 totally different audiences. Now, a lot of times the things that I might be communicating might have some through lines, but it's recognizing the lens in which they see the world and how do you best connect with that? Everybody's lenses are different. And so one of it, going back to just know your audience from a district leadership end, like the buzzwords, we buzzword bingo everything we do in education. Internally, there's a good understanding why we do it. But sometimes the people on the other end have no idea what we're talking about. It's not knocking them. It's just not their world. If I were to go to a medical conference today and all they did was buzzword everything they do, I would have no idea what they're talking about. Talk to me like a human being, right? And I think, again, going back to knowing our audience is huge. Right. The second thing, Dan, relating to what you said is also knowing yourself as a human being. When you analyze, like I mentioned, the Enneagram kind of thing earlier, just like who you are, how you communicate, how you see the world. When you're pointing out your use of sarcasm, I can be right there with you. And what I might text in my best friend guys groups is going to look a little bit different than how I display it to my communication to a few parents that I've never met before, right? And so knowing that audience's piece, but knowing how you are as well. And some folks are, Dan, to your point, just super direct, right? Like an Enneagram, they're 8, right? And they're just, we're going to get it done. You ask me a question, I answered the question, and there's no fluff before it and there's no fluff after it. And I remember sometimes being like, oh, does this person not like me? Like, are they upset? Same thing, right? Like I was saying earlier, are they upset with me? No, it's just, I asked the question, they answered the question. And in their mind, like, what else do you want? But that's just how they're wired. And it's not a bad thing. They're not a bad person. It's not that one's better than the other, but it's understanding that people's dynamics and the way they're wired will impact how they communicate. But they also have to understand how they communicate is different than the people they're communicating to, and making sure that doesn't get misconstrued, right? And know that this teacher is super sensitive or needs more of that kind of nurturing piece. I'm not going to avoid any sort of issues. That's not what I mean, but I'm going to try to meet that person where they are or know they're going to respond to a little bit different than somebody else in a different case.
I want to get to this first point about your presentation. You say your title is Great Educators and Leaders Are Great Communicators. So what does that mean, like, at the different levels? Can you talk about what you mean by that and what that looks like?
Absolutely. And I'm excited about this session. I've done it for a board conference and a superintendent conference recently, a bunch of teachers recently. Part of the reason I named it is because I really believe that great educators are great communicators, because here's the inverse of that. It's a real challenge if I struggle to communicate well to build culture. If I struggle to communicate well, it's a real challenge to build trust, right? I gave a couple examples when I goofed that up earlier. But the flip side, great communication can build culture. Great communication can help build those relationships. When I think about it, great teachers are great communicators. Mm-hmm. They communicate through story. They communicate through narrative. They communicate in a way that engages people. That's all communication, right? Assessment and feedback, like feedback is communication. So how do I improve instructionally? One of the best ways we know how to do that is to improve our feedback. And that feedback is communication. If I'm grading a paper and I put 88 on the top of the paper, but it doesn't teach anybody anything, it's minimal communication. What 12% don't they know? Sometimes we don't even answer that question, right? But take that exact same paper, sitting side by side, the coaching, the narrative, the feedback, the written, that's the feedback, but that's all communication. And I think part of what we're getting at with that, when we think about it, is communication takes so many different forms. In person, we've all had the situation where we're sitting down for a meeting, maybe it's an IEP, and maybe the parents are coming in hot, something hasn't been done, maybe we goof something up, whatever the case might be, and the parent walks in and their arms are folded and they're giving us the look, right? They haven't said anything, but they've said a lot. right? And so when we think about communication, there's the nonverbal, somebody's eyes, somebody's posture. You can analyze the kind of postures of when people cross their arms in meeting. What does that often mean? There's a whole science behind all that. But the flip side is when we think about just communication in general, there's the auditory piece, there's the visual piece. If I'm expecting something, I'm more prone to hear it. And that's part of the challenge. Your brain's always trying to make these connections, just the way it works. And if it's anticipating something, it's more prone to hear it. That's where all sorts of biases come in. If I agree with something politically, I'm more prone to share it on Facebook. It's that type of mindset, because the connections that your brain's making to how you see the world, to what you internalize, right?
Yeah.
It's also why, as a speaker, I recognize two people could be in a session. One of them walks away being like, this was one of the best sessions ever. And the other person's, it was all right. Right. And it's not like I did two different things for two different people. It was they internalized it different. And that, going back to communication, really comes back to how do people internalize it? Part of going back to your question, the challenge for school and district leaders is sometimes they're communicating for thousands and thousands of people. And you can't differentiate for every person, nor do you know everybody's stories, the hidden stories of why people perceive things in different ways. So going back to why great educators are great communicators is because so many facets of the role. When I'm leading a meeting, so much of it's communication. When I'm putting out the district newsletter, that's communication. When I'm standing in front of or sitting aside of a school board as a superintendent, the way I present things, the way I perceive things, the way I share things, the way I respond to questions, it's all communication. And I really don't believe, my personal opinion here, I don't believe you can be a poor communicator and an incredible leader. I don't think they go hand in hand. You're launching a new initiative. You're trying to drum up support in the community. Great communication will help that happen. Poor communication will cut it off at the knees. And so my point is, I want people to really, number one, reflect on their communication, and in their leadership roles, when they leave the conference, when they go to put something out to their staff or to a community, they're super intentional about it. The best schools in the world don't happen by chance. They happen when we're intentional about it. And same thing, communication, we've got to be intentional about it. And also recognize we're human. No matter who we are, we're going to goof this up sometimes. And when we do, it's important to own it and then figure it out and do better next time. When we know better, we do better. That edge is there as well.
Hopefully. Although my wife would say me and the dishwasher would be a counterpoint to that, where I should know better, but I don't seem to ever do better.
Another thing that you said that kind of floats to the top for me is the goal of communication being connect with the audience. I think Dan talking about his relationship with his wife, relationship with the dishwasher, right? But then we also have this relationship with a district leader communicating to families whose children attend the district schools, but we don't have an intimate relationship with them like Dan has with his wife and they have with their dishwasher. Like, how do you connect with communication when relationship levels are also different? Teacher to a student, but this is my first year teacher and first time I've ever met this student. How do I build that relationship quickly and build trust versus over time? I'm not sure how long Dan and his wife have been married, but years of talking around the dishwasher, right? I'm not ready to fire you, even though you don't load it right, but the cups go on the top, not the bottom. How do we maintain good relationships in the midst of the complexities of just communicating with each other and the different forms that it takes?
If I may, I do think that's relevant example, because she's been showing me how to load the dishwasher for years, and I continually get it wrong. Okay. So in a classroom, in a school environment, we've told you how we post your learning target, formative assessment. We did the PD. We did this. We have sent it out in an email. I know teachers are like my wife, banging their heads. This is the expectation. Am I communicating it wrong? Right? Like, what can I do better? How can I reflect on that? So I'm interested in like if you're, when you're working with principals, what questions do you ask them to reflect on when they're trying to figure out how to communicate better? And I'll take notes for my wife to as well.
Dan, the first thing I was going to say is I'm working over here on a performance improvement plan for you that I'll whip up on the dishwasher piece, because that's just not acceptable after all these years.
No, it isn't.
I hear you on that. I hear you. I feel that pain. So I think one of the things I'd love to dive into is this notion around something that's fascinated me for a number of years since I first heard it. And it's called this curse of knowledge, right?
Uh-huh.
So the curse of knowledge is a scientific study that goes back a number of years where they bring people in, and I'm going to do this as part of the workshop. I'm not going to fully give it away. So I'd love for you, if you're listening, get to the workshop. You're not getting it all here. I'm giving you glimpses. And so they brought all these people in and they said, how can we tease out communication? Like, how can we communicate something, but communicate it differently and see if they still realize they know the information? So let me hit pause. Every time we communicate, we make assumptions. But process that for a minute. Even hopping on the podcast, having conversations, our listeners are making assumptions about who I am and what I believe and all these different pieces. The other day, I was in North Dakota and I was speaking to a few hundred teachers, and standing in front of them, I'm naturally making assumptions of they're really good people. They work hard. They got a lot on their plate. They love what they do, but it's super challenging in what they do. And so I naturally make assumptions before I communicate. And the reality is you also leave things out when you communicate, because just like a podcast, we've got a limited amount of time. I can't tell you every single thing I've ever known about communication and every story I've ever had about communication, because time's of the essence, right? And so when we communicate, we intentionally leave things out because you have to. The problem becomes when we leave certain things out that we assume people know, there becomes a disconnect. Right. This Thirst of Knowledge study, they brought all these people in and they said, how can we tease this out? And what they did was they used music. So they came up with songs that if they communicated in a different way, they believed people should probably know. The song might be, I'm not talking like Guns N' Roses here. I'm talking about the song like Happy Birthday, right? The assumption was the majority of these people probably know the song Happy Birthday. If we started singing it, they could probably all jump in, but it does make an assumption, right? So what they said is we're not going to sing it, we're not going to hum it. We're going to tap these songs out. So they're going to tap it out. And so they made predictions and they said, what percent of people will be able to identify information that they already know if they communicate it in a way that leaves some information out? They're not singing it, they're not giving the words, but it's communicated differently. So they made predictions. Over 50%. These songs are easy. They've done them hundreds of times, right? 25% was like one of the lowest predictions. What they found was under 10% of people could identify information they already knew when it left information out and was communicated a little bit differently. But if you think about it, every time we communicate with our staff, we leave some information out, and sometimes we're communicating in a different way, right? And so what they found, it was under 10% of people, right? And so in our workshop at the event this summer, I'm going to actually prove this. And every time I've ever done it I just did it recently with 300 or 400 superintendents, literally a song that they've probably sung hundreds of times, 2 people in the room knew. Every time we've done it, it's been under 10% can identify what we're actually doing. And so part of that, I think it really gets to what advice do we have for school and district leaders? I think it also gets to like, what does evidence or research show effective communication looks like? Yeah. One of the things that I'll start in that conversation, really to get to your question here, is recognizing that every person that you're communicating to is going to look at it through their own individual lens. We understand it differently. We get that a little bit earlier. Yeah. The other piece that I will say, one of the things I believe school and district leaders are problem solvers, right? They're used to putting out fires. They're used to coming in every day. Somebody needs advice. There's an issue over here. How do we fix it? How do we get from A to point B? Which is a really good thing. However, and I'm looking at myself in the mirror when I say this, not at all the other school and district leaders, but maybe they can connect with me on this because they would agree. Many times we try to solve the situation right away. Like somebody says, okay, here's the problem with this. And instantly we're like, all right, we got to do this. And sometimes what happens is we just need to be quiet and we need to listen first. And I think a key to communication, when we talk about communication as like a cycle, is to close the mouth and to open up the ears and listen first. And I think we need to do a lot more listening because, and you see this sometimes in meetings, right? The person that has to get their point out, you're 4 or 5 points down the road and they're still jumping in about it, or the people that monopolize meetings, it's all communication related, right? And so when we think about it, listening first is one of the first pieces that I would say. When I think about, you gave the wife example, the amount of times I've heard, I don't want you to solve the problem right now. Just listen. So whether you're talking about in a marriage or you're talking about as a school leader, sometimes communication is just listening to really understand. A lot of times it's the difference between listening to respond and listening to understand. We need to start there, listening to understand. The other piece is like leading with transparency. A lot of times we're communicating information that is not easy. To build trust, we need to be transparent. Sometimes we may want to sugarcoat something to kind of let them down easy. I can struggle with that. But to build trust, you need to be honest. And so as those times is whether a superintendent, if I'm sharing something with my community about the hard budget crisis that we're in, you have to be transparent because even in those moments, it's hard, it's a challenge, but you don't want to get you on the backside that you weren't honest or you weren't forthright, because that's going to shatter trust. And I think that transparency is key to building trust and to building culture.
When you say transparency, what I've heard you say is sort of thinking about why this is important, why this matters to me, how we got here, what I'm thinking behind this, and being honest about that. And, as a leader, sometimes when you say the curse of knowledge, we make a lot of assumptions. We assume that people come to school with certain expectations for themselves, for their children, and we go into it with that. And sometimes we don't try to learn about what's happening. And that definitely comes into play as a teacher, because you're the expert. And so when you're the expert, it's hard to remember what it's like to not have prior knowledge and not have schema. So from an instructional point of view, I can see how that curse of knowledge can come into play. Erin, what are you thinking about in terms of applications or thoughts on what he's saying?
To the point of transparency and to listening, sometimes just even as humans, we're going to roll with it, Daniel. You put it out here with the dishwasher, right? You have a thought and a desire for how your wife would communicate to you about her expectations with the dishwasher. And she also has a goal in her communication to you about her expectations with the dishwasher. But both of you want the dishes washed.
We do.
I'm assuming.
We do,
right?
For sure.
That's my assumption. So even listening to this scenario, there is a problem to be solved, but sometimes we get caught in the crossfire of the how and the how you're saying it and what you're not doing right, or you didn't do it the way I wanted you to do it. Like, together, we want, bottom line, the dishes clean.
We all want those kids educated, and we all want those kids successful. There's nobody in that building who doesn't want that.
And even that sometimes for us as educators, as leaders, as teachers, as parents, as district leaders, even that can sometimes be an assumption. And it causes crosshair, because ideally we would love to think that every person in the leadership seat, everyone in the teacher seat, everyone in the student seat and parent seat, they want to do something.
Right.
But I think it's also our responsibility to create such an environment where we get on the same page about what we're doing together, so that our communication flows towards the desired result of the collective. Thomas, you're talking about in the session, these experiences that you'll create. And I love experiential learning, because I can come out of a session having heard something and seen something, and it really not be an experience that becomes mine, right? But when I get to experience seeing it, touching it, talking about it, seeing how other people perceive it, it sparks something in me and changes something in me. So when I leave that session to communicate what I learned, it's very personal. And I think sometimes with communication, we forget that communication as a vehicle, it's personal first. I want something, so I talk about it. I'm looking for something. You could use the word selfish, but not even with a negative connotation per se, but it could be. I want to say something to Daniel because I have a thought. That's about me. But how I say it to Daniel is either going to help or hurt me get what I want when I go to Daniel with the conversation. And how he perceives me coming to him with whatever I brought is going to come back to me in so now we have this experience that's taking place, all because somebody wanted something and somebody else thought. So transparency, listening, connecting, trust, those are not the things that we throw out on the top when we say communicate better. How do we shift the fact that we use communication as a vehicle to get somewhere, but there's things underneath it that can either erode it or help us create better environments where great leaders are great communicators?
Yeah. So let me build on this dishwasher example, because we take about it. Yeah, Dan, this is maybe you didn't want me as a guest. Oh, yeah. Let's talk about your marriage here, Dan.
I opened the door. Let's go.
But taking this, it's a great analogy and connection. It is, because if you think about it, let's say your wife didn't communicate with you that she was frustrated, and you did it wrong, and she gets frustrated, but she doesn't say anything. And then you did it, gets frustrated.
Not the case, but
didn't say anything. Go. And then the next time you put in, and she loses it on you, and you're like, what's wrong with you today? And all of a sudden it becomes that back and forth. So it's an example of one of the biggest struggles district leaders have is they'll share the expectations out in a way that's clear to them. People will do what they hear and what they believe on the whole is accurate. The gap then of take that example, a leader walks into a classroom and they're like, and this is not what I wanted it to look like. And they're thinking, but this is how I heard it. That gap, sometimes we look at as a skills gap, or that person didn't try hard enough. They didn't put enough into it, where sometimes it's simply, that's a communication gap with the way that it was understood. And that's what that person did versus here's what I expect. I was doing this session with a leadership retreat in New York, and I have people draw something, and they're coaching one person, one person's coaching, the other person's drawing something, but they can't see it as they draw it. The challenge, right? And this principal is coaching a superintendent, and the principal said, draw a circle. And the superintendent drew this like tiny little circle, and he did it perfectly. But the principal was like, no, like a real circle. To which, like, I'm laughing hysterically, being like, what does that even mean? And what he wanted him to do was draw a good sized circle on the plate. To him, it was crystal clear. To the superintendent, he heard draw a circle, so he did. But that was a communication gap. Going to the dishwasher example, going to the district leadership example, one of the biggest aspects of communication is also making sure we're doing our best to use clear and concise messaging. Even of itself, that has some wiggle room. So if I'm in that connection, Daniel, going to that dishwasher example, one of the communication things I might try is, listen, the next time we do this, I just care about the top row. And the only thing I want to see on the top row are cups flipped upside down. That's it. That's all you're going to do. That's
pathetic.
Cups flipped up. If it's not up top, it's not a cup. Don't put it up there or whatever. And that's all we're going to chunk this baby out. And I think clear and concise messaging, let's take that dishwasher example, move it to school leadership. Sometimes in the email we send, and we've already called out some of the issues, I can be somebody, heck, I'm a speaker and an author, so I can be super wordy. But I have to recognize if I'm on page 8 of the email, nobody's reading it. And yes, like we want the details, and that's important. And I get not everything's a bulleted list, but we have to look at if this is an 8-page email, unless it's the only possible way in a crisis situation or whatever, it's probably not the best way to communicate what I'm looking to communicate. And I think that clear and concise messaging matters. So the other point that I'll make building up on that is this notion that consistency matters. And part of the idea, when we look at it from a leadership team, a lot of the folks listening, they might have an assistant principal or they have an assistant superintendent. One of the things, having been in those situations before, I know that sometimes staff would go to one person. It was, I go to mom or I go to dad, depending on the answer that I want. If I don't like it over here, I'm going to go to the assistant principal because I know they're going to say a little bit different. That is one of the largest ways to shatter trust overnight. If you're doing this as a leadership team, your messaging and your communication needs to be consistent, because when it's not, that's where trust gets shattered. That's where gaps happen. And that's where things start to crumble. When we're looking at things like initiatives or bond referendums or all that kind of thing, we have to have, as a team, we have to all be on the same page first to make sure we're communicating in a way that really makes sense. So let me make one more point on this. And I think from a best practice end is to really seek feedback and clarity for things that are really important. You can't do this for every email you send, and I'm not remotely suggesting that, but let me give you an example. If you're a principal listening to this, the person on your staff that the moment you hit send on an email, 3 minutes later, you hear the knock, knock. Can we talk about that? You know that person on your team? And by the way, that doesn't mean they're a bad person. I'm not suggesting that. What if I'm about to send something to our staff and recognizing email's not probably the best way, but here's something I've got to send out. Maybe it's a little bit sensitive. I just need to make sure they get it right. What if I called that person in and said, hey, I need to send something out to the team today. Can you read through this? Is my tone okay? If not, please tell me. What's going to be the conversation in the faculty room the moment I hit send? Like, what do you think I'm trying to say? What am I not trying to say? What questions do you have? And can you help me edit anything that might not be clear? It goes back to, and let me say, first of all, I wish I did more of that when I was a leader. I think my own personal growth and reflecting on that, there was times where if I just paused and I had 1 or 2 people that looked over it and asked questions. What do you mean by that? How do you understand this is what we're supposed to do? Because you think about the amount of hours that I would hit send on something, I put it out there, and now I spend 3 hours putting out the fires because I communicated it poorly. What a total waste of time. And so I think seeking feedback and clarity is something I wish I did more of, because it would have saved me a lot of heartache. And it goes back to the adage that I love, that people are, and it's not my original thought, I wish I knew who said it, people are less likely to burn down things that they help build. That's a powerful notion when it comes to communication. I've got one final story that I'd love to share, but certainly let Erin and Dan, if you want to weigh in on it before we do that.
I want to hear that final story, and we are about out of time, so we'll get to that. That'll be our last word. I want to just dig into that last thing you said. What I'm hearing is the when you're writing something that you feel might be emotional or that you feel might stir emotions in somebody, it's really important to pause and get feedback from somebody. Now, today, a lot of people are using AI for that. Look at this email and tell me, how can I make this clear, concise, and, transparent? Like, I can use that, or I could ask a colleague who knows the audience better. I have a person, and we acknowledge that we're each other's person, where if I'm writing an email to somebody, I'm writing an email to my bosses about something that I have a strong opinion about and that I'm right and other people are wrong. We always share it with each other first, and ask them to read it and make sure I'm not going to get in trouble or that I'm not going to trigger somebody or walk on a landmine. So that's a huge component. Being self-aware of where this is coming from, how you're feeling. Is it coming from emotion? And seeking somebody's eyes to help you reflect on that. You could be saving someone's life or career with that kind of feedback, because a lot of people have suffered because they didn't take that time.
And again, I'm not saying any of these I do really well. I think I'm still personally a work in progress, and I think we all are. And I think, that humility and leadership is also important. This is an area that we can all get better. We're all still going to mess it up sometimes, but we need to own it. Dan, let me give you one final thought, and I'll share one final really quick story. The final point that I would say, and there'd be more if we had more time, but the importance in communication of leveraging the power of storytelling. Things happen in somebody's brain when they hear a story. You mentioned the word emotion that can get tapped. There's this neural coupling that happens. Dopamine can get released, right? All these different pieces. And as schools, we have incredible stories to tell, right? And so many times we feel, and I don't mean this politically, but the reality is we feel attacked in so many different ways, right? It is our job to be the storyteller in chief of our building, of our district, to share out the story, but maybe do it in a different way. And I want to give a shout out to my buddy, Dr. Tony Sinanis. He was the New York State Principal of the Year a number of years ago. He's now a superintendent in New York. And I go back to a story that he shared. He was sending a newsletter. He would do it weekly as a principal, and he would open up the rates, and it was 14%, 13% of his population was actually opening up the newsletter. So he spends all this time, puts it all together, hours and hours, puts it out there. And then 1 in 10 people actually open it up. And so on one hand, that we can continue to do the things we've always done, and we'll probably always get the results we've always gotten. It's also that kind of definition of insanity on the flip side. So he said, how can I change this? And so he said, instead of me typing out the newsletter, what if our kids shared the newsletter, and we'll have kids edit it and put it together? Now, hit pause. Did he need to get permission from parents? Did he need to be able to video and have this stuff? Absolutely. Within a few months, his newsletter rate, which was now led by a video of the kids, tripled because he shifted the way that he communicated. And he did it leading with children. So all of a sudden, grandma in Boise, Idaho knew what was happening at a little school in New York because he changed the way that it was happening. And now their news was being shared all over Facebook and other social platforms. And what happens when mom of little Johnny wants to share it on her Facebook page, because there he is talking about social studies that week in first grade. And it totally shifted that process. And we talked about building culture, leading with kids, the opportunity to highlight kids and all those pieces. And so I end that with the incredible power of storytelling. And as leaders, it is our job to share the story, be loud about it, and proud about it. People are talking about what you do every day. It is our job to help make sure that narrative is clear so people really understand what's happening in our schools. Telling our story is one of the best assets that we have in our community to build trust, to build culture, to build those relationships, to be so darn proud of the work that's happening in our schools each and every day.
That is well said. Thank you very much.
No,
and unfortunately, if you don't tell your own story, someone else might tell it for you. So you should own it. Thank you, Mr. Thomas Murray, a featured speaker at our conference. Sounds like it's going to be a fun and engaging session with all kinds of music and activities. Do you have a website that that people can go to learn more about you?
My homepage is thomascmurray.com. And here's my promise. If you want to join us at the session, I promise you're going to laugh a lot. Number 2, you're going to reflect on your own leadership and your communication. And number 3, I'm going to give you everything so you can replicate it with your staff and have similar conversations with your staff, because that practical aspect is just as important for me.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Thank you, Erin Anderson Williams, for joining us.
Awesome session. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashley Shaw, for producing this episode. And we will see you all next time on the Making Schools Work podcast.
Thank you for listening to this episode brought to you by the Southern Regional Education Board. SREB is a nonprofit dedicated to improving education from pre-K all the way to PhD and into the workforce. Visit sreb.org for resources on instructional practices, teacher data, career pathways, and more. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow us on social media. You can find us on Facebook at SREB-School Improvement and on Twitter/X and Instagram, both at SREB Education. See you next week.